thank you all for being here. That's me. I've been at JourneyTEAM for a little while and love doing consulting, okay? So what we're going to cover today, why this matters, some guiding principles, order of events, important consideration and key updates, that's why you're all here, right? And work stream considerations then versus now. Who was at BTS in 2021? Any hands? 2021, Mark, okay? A few of you, awesome. So in 2021, I did a very, very similar topic about getting off of Active Directory, right? And so it was fun to go back to that deck and look at the recommendations at the time of the event in 2021 and what tech was there and where we are today. And it's a different story. So I'm going to contrast the differences there between 2021 and today, 2024. So that's what that means. All right, so let's jump into it. Why does this matter? How many of you, first of all, does everyone here have Active Directory in your ecosystem, or who is pure cloud? Pure Entra ID cloud? One? You're just here for the popcorn? All right. Okay, a couple of you are pure cloud. Did you start natively pure cloud? Or did you migrated and got there from AD?
We didn't have much to migrate.
Okay, it was a pretty easy journey, huh? Okay, all right. Okay, all right. So most enterprises, businesses are dealing with this lovely thing called Active Directory. It's near and dear to my heart, okay? But as we move more services into the cloud, understanding the role of Active Directory to the cloud becomes a bigger deal, and it's a different story today, okay? Legacy patterns are not maturing. I'm talking to customers that have some technology that does governance against AD worlds, and I go, man, the pace and evolution of governance services in the cloud is far outpacing what is down here, okay? And that's where investments are being done. Devices are factors, and that's really kind of weird in an AD world where my device, my computer, is one of the factors that can be leveraged to say what assets and resources can you get to. Historically, my computer connected to Active Directory, got to have line of sight to my favorite domain controller, hence that means VPN, hence I'm inside the castle wall, and that's the traditional world, right? That's not reality today, okay? All right, so, and the effort and investment is going to the cloud versus on-prem. I mentioned that, okay? All right, so that's, and I like to bring this up. If you were starting a brand new company today, would you stand up Active Directory? Ooh, that's a fun thought, right? It depends on the applications. Is that where everyone thinks? Okay, and which apps you need to support the business, okay? All right, order of events. Step one, most of you have probably already done at least step one, you're probably step two, and you're thinking about step three, if not further. Step one, pretty simple, take your Active Directory, hook it to Entra IDs. Everyone know that Azure Active Directory has been renamed to Entra ID. You've heard that, it's old news now. All right, I'm not gonna I'll call it Entra or Entra ID. For now. That is the best joke of the day, for now. Very good, okay. So you attach AD to Entra, you synchronize your users, your groups, your computers. That means you're now in a hybrid state, step two, okay? As you start decoupling from AD, I'm going to talk about some more of that. Then you move more cloud-centric and minimize your AD, and then you're, ta-da, 100% in the cloud. A couple have done that. I'm lucky enough at JourneyTEAM to say that we have broke the sync engine, mastered all objects in the cloud, everything net new is running in the cloud, and have I turned off my domain controller? No, I technically haven't. Okay. It's still running on a server behind our lunchroom, and if it dies, I don't care. Okay, I can honestly say I don't care. We're not using it for DHCP or for DNS or anything like that. No PKI. It could be turned off, and I don't care. Okay, but has it been turned off? No. Okay, but I don't think anyone's logged into it in years. Okay. And the power comes with our lease, so I don't care. All right. Okay, so step one, I'm not going to belabor this. Attached to the cloud, right? You've got your domain joined devices. Users are managed in AD. They get synchronized up. apps authenticate to either Active Directory or up into the cloud, or you're using federated authentication. Raise your hand if you use ADFS today. Any ADFSers here? Woo, woo. I wish I could give you prizes because I want to help you guys, okay? If you want to get off of that, we'll talk, all right? Help me out. You're like, nothing new, Eric. I want to get off it for years, right? Okay. So then we go hybrid. Lots of you are in this model, I assume, okay? How many of you are still domain joining desktops to Active Directory? Okay, cool. Why? Okay. Okay. You're too busy. Ah, okay. You love technical debt. And the reason why I say that is intra-joining is what it's now called. A desktop, Windows 10 or 11, straight to the cloud, still allows you to interact with traditional Active Directory-based resources like file shares, or Kerberos authentication, or even NTLM authentication, okay? That may be new to some of you. You may think that, hey, if I just connect this to the cloud, it has no concept of AD, and that's not true. The user object, if it's still in Active Directory and it's synchronized up, and the device is connected straight to the cloud, when that device is inside your favorite castle wall, aka your network, and it needs to talk to on-prem things that are backed by Active Directory, you can get integrated Windows authentication and have a good experience. Okay? So if you're still domain joining PCs to Active Directory, come talk to us. We can help you. All right? You start moving applications to the cloud and enable self-service password reset for users. That's where we start saying the user object is still in AD, but I can go to the cloud and say I forgot my password or reset it, and it gets written back into Active Directory. Okay? Step 3, we start decoupling from on-premises. This is what I'm saying. Join your devices straight up to Entra. Provision them with Intune. If you have to sync and provision identity data down to AD or down to on-prem applications, there's a story there of either third-party technology that use that, or we skimify your application, or we use these magic ECMA connectors, which are part of the Entra ID Connect sync engine to provision down into on-prem AD. Okay? Not to AD, to on-prem apps, I should say. I'll talk more about that in a future slide. Manage your legacy apps in the cloud with App Proxy. One of my very favorite features of Entra ID is the Entra ID Application Proxy. It lets me access those on-prem resources without needing to be inside the corporate network or VPN'd in securely over the internet with conditional access, multi-factor, etc. in play. Okay? So if you have an on-prem application that's not a traditional client server, I call it a fat client installed on a computer talking to a backend, right? If it's a web app on-prem and you want to get to it without VPN, come talk to us. Okay? App Proxy is your best friend. All right. And then you move your file share, start moving things up to the cloud, and that leads you then to cloud-centric. We start looking at how you onboard users, and those can come into the cloud first and then get written down to AD. That story's changed in the last few years. Manage your legacy apps in the cloud. There's Entra ID domain services. That's like if you have to have a domain controller, can you get that if you just have Entra ID? Yes, but not with Entra ID. You spin up this other little service called Entra ID Domain Services, and that's Active Directory running for you as a managed service in the cloud. Okay? And the identities in that are based off of the Entra ID identities that get pushed into that world. Okay? All right, and then finally, you are 100% in the cloud. Okay? All your devices are managed in the cloud. There's no on-prem identity footprint. Oh man, I forgot to change Azure AD on that slide, sorry. It's dear to my heart. Anyway, and all your apps authenticate to Entra ID, or if you do have to have AD, you go Entra ID DS, okay? All right, so for the fun part, I'm gonna be going deeper into each of these topics. We're gonna talk about Windows 11 web sign-in, group provisioning and write back, Entra ID API-based provisioning, that's some fun topics, B2B use cases and cross-tenant sync, and the fun part of actually disconnecting. All right, Windows 11 web sign-in. Has anyone played with this or used this at all in the room? No, all right, Chris, awesome, all right. So, everyone's familiar with these three icons when you're signing into Windows 10 or 11, right? You can do Windows Hello face, right? You can do a PIN, you can do a password, biometrics. There's a new option that's called Web Sign-In. This allows the Windows desktop to, it does require an internet connection. It doesn't do cached credentials. So the device needs to have a connection to the big bad internet, okay? I shouldn't say that. The connection to the internet. And when you authenticate, it's a complete modern authentication experience, okay? Think of your browser logging into Microsoft 365 and that UI of the browser. That's now available on the desktop, okay? And it supports any external identity provider. ADFS, Ping, Okta, any type of like Microsoft sends you somewhere else to log in, works beautifully here. Okay, so any of you are using Okta in the room, you don't have to raise your hand, but Okta is some good technology, okay? Then you would see the Okta login experience on the desktop, okay? That's new with Windows 11, update something, it's pretty new, okay?
No cache creds, something that's a problem, or is that an advantage, or what's the advantage to that?
Okay, the question is, does no cache creds mean I shouldn't do this? Is that a disadvantage or is that a problem, right? Well, if the device, if you take it away and you're trying to do web sign-in and you don't have internet access, how the crap are you going to do web sign-in? You just can't, right? And so you can switch back to one of these other methods, okay? And use that to authenticate, but there's no cached credentials with, quote, web sign-in. You hit Control-Alt-Delete on the desktop, and then you can get out of the web sign-in experience. Okay? Great question. Mm-hmm.
So does that allow you to do single sign-on with something like an Okta or?
Yeah, the question is, so that would allow me, if I'm using Okta or some third-party IDP, could I do single sign-on at the desktop to that IDP? Absolutely. Okay, good stuff. Okay, all right, so be aware of that. That's definitely a path to the journey of, hey, full connected to the cloud, single sign-on in the cloud. All right, Entra ID API provisioning options. This is technically in preview today. So look at this. Most of you probably create identities today in Active Directory and they sync up to the cloud. Right? That's been happening for years. We're very familiar with that. There's some new technology Microsoft has called Entra ID Cloud Sync. Okay? There's technically two sync engine Microsoft has. The one that's got an engine from 15 years ago called MIM, that was called FIM, and now it's the same engine that Entra ID Connect uses, or they have the Entra ID Connect Cloud Sync, which is a very different architectural model. All the config is done in the cloud, and a little teeny lightweight agent is what talks to AD. Versus Entra ID Connect Sync, or Azure AD Connect Sync, has all the logic and the database, everything running locally, and you can only have one active at a time, right? The Cloud Sync is way better architecture. You can have 10 agents if you want. They can run all together. You get high availability, but there's some features that doesn't support. So the point is, this service here for API provisioning allows you to create a user through this magic API running on Entra. And depending on where you want that user to get created, it'll either go straight to, get my little pointer here. Hold on. It'll go straight to Entra ID here. So you can come in through this API and it'll go up here for a cloud only. If you want to create that user down into AD, you can do that, and then it will sync up here to Entra ID. Okay? So for your onboarding, you can start creating users in the cloud natively, or start from the cloud. They'll go in and they'll sync up. Okay? So today this is available to feed a CSV in, or you use your HR provisioning solution can tie into this, or you can write a Power App or a Logic App, Azure Logic App, which takes your input and feeds it into that API. Okay? So this is been a long time coming from Microsoft, okay? Any questions on this? In the back.
What kind of extra licensing does this require?
Oh man, I was waiting for that question to come up. What type of extra licensing does this require?
This is Microsoft. So.
This is Microsoft. And every one of you that have an E5 that were like, I've got everything they have to offer is not feeling so excited right now, right? So I get your question. This can be done with Intra ID P1, okay? So most of you probably already have this today, okay? So nothing crazy special that you need for a governance license or something like that, okay? Great question.
P1 included in the business basic standard?
Great question. So where it is Intra ID P1, what bundle of bundles of bundles can you find that? You can find that in Business Premium or any of the M365 E3s plan. But if you have a business SKU, you got to be on Business Premium. If you're on the business SKU, I would highly recommend Business Premium if you're going all in on the cloud, because then you get Intune as part of that as well. Intra ID Plan 1 is part of that. You get a Windows license as part of that. So there's some good stuff in the whole Business Premium. That's the sweet spot for small, anything under 300. Okay, question? Yeah, can you augment this with Power Automate? Ask me in a month, because we got a project we're doing right now for a client that wants this, okay? And so Power Automate is a road we just barely started to go down. So there's a good chance that will work, yes. The documentation today says you need a Power App, or excuse me, an Azure Logic app, but I think we can do the same thing with Power Automate. It's an API, right? And so I think it'll be fine. Any other questions? All right, Group Write Back V2. You think version 2, that's got to be the latest, greatest, right? That's going bye-bye. So if any of you have groups in the cloud, and I guarantee you all have native cloud groups, meaning they were built in the cloud and they're a cloud-only thing. If you have Office 365 groups or teams, those are all native cloud things, and they have nothing to do with on-prem Active Directory groups, right? Okay? It's always fun when we do audits. We go look and see how many cloud groups exist in a tenant compared to AD mastered groups. Okay? I was working with a client, and they have 400,000 AD groups, and they have 150,000 cloud groups, right? And they're like, oh, I had no idea I had 150,000 cloud groups that, oh, how am I governing groups? I'm doing that in AD. 150,000 groups, and who's a member? What are they being used for? Fun stuff, okay? So if you got groups in the cloud and you're using Group Write Back V2, that's going bye-bye. But there's new technology that will let you take a group in the cloud and sync it back to on-prem. It uses that cloud sync engine I told you about. And if you have Azure AD Connect or Intra AD Connect, I can bring up an instance of the cloud sync parallel with it for that group write back use case, and they can live side by side. Okay? So here's my guidance here. Master groups in the cloud. So in your evolution, in your journey to get off of AD and move wholly into the cloud, start with your groups, flipping them to go to the cloud. I'll talk more about the process, the fun part I mentioned, right? But if you start by saying, if I plumb in Group Write Back, and I can build security groups, and those, if I need those for any AD resource, they can get pushed down and boom, they appear in AD, and I can give them permissions to a file share or access a server or whatever AD stuff you need. But now my management and my governance of the group is in the cloud. You've just taken a major step toward that, shifting that model. Okay? So that's what I'm trying to say here. You get the management, the governance, the flexibility of that cloud. And when I say flexibility, I think I mentioned this somewhere else, but here's something I'm seeing more and more. Ready? You've got all these cloud resources in Microsoft's world. We'll talk Power Apps, Power BI, SharePoint, Azure stuff, etc., right? And where do all of those services, where do they look for authentication and authorization? Do they look to AD? No, they don't. They look to Intra ID. Okay? So if I have an AD group and it's synchronized up, Can I use it to give access to my Power App or Power BI or SharePoint Online? Sure I can. But what I'm seeing more and more of today is that if you have a partner that you're doing work with and you invite them to your tenant as a guest user, how many of you do that? Okay, we're familiar with that? I have a bunch of customers that I'm a guest in their tenant because we're working on projects. Happens a lot. And that's happening more and more. The more businesses move into M365, the more collaboration between is happening. Can I take this guest user in your tenant and put it in that Active Directory group that's getting them access to that SharePoint site? No, I cannot. So that's why I'm telling you, start mastering your groups in the cloud. Because can I put a guest in a cloud mastered group that's synced down? All day, every day, baby. Okay? So that's where I'm coming from when I'm telling you this philosophy and this approach. All right. I just explained that whole point. Great. Native cloud groups, they enable self-service capabilities. Who wants to give ADUC, Active Directory Users and Computer, our favorite tool, to an end user to manage their security group because they own the data that they're giving access to? Right? I know people that do that, okay? Hey, in the cloud, I've got mygroups.microsoft.com. I can go there, I can see all the groups that I'm an owner of. I can manage people right there. Okay, and so the tooling to manage groups natively in the cloud is a very different story than Active Directory groups. Okay? And write intra-ID groups back to AD if required, not the other way around. Okay? And the actual picture to do that, and you can govern this a group at a time. That's what's cool. Okay? So I can go say for this group in the cloud, I want it to flow down to on-prem, but not this one. And that's an attribute set on each group in the cloud.
Eric?
Please.
So you mentioned that group right back to using the on-prem sync is dead, but the cloud sync is what's replacing that. So I'm curious in the room, how many people are using cloud sync?
Yeah, anyone using the new cloud sync engine? One?
So you
not a lot.
Good. So that's what would replace this.
Yep. Yeah, if you're using Group Write Back v2 with Intra-ID Connect sync, that's going bye-bye. So in the corner, you need to look at Cloud Sync if you want to maintain Group Write Back. Or you already have Cloud Sync, sorry. Wrong. Yep. Exactly, yep. Okay, thank you. All right, Intra-ID cross-tenant sync. How many of you have multiple tenants in your ecosystem? Anyone? A few hands, yeah. Mark, yeah. Okay. This is designed for, so here's the use case here real quick. You've got Fabricam Mexico, right? Tenant number 1. You've got Fabricam US, tenant number 2. And you've got Contoso. And these users all need to access resources in Contoso's world. So they need to be guests in that world, right? You could invite them as a guest. You can put them in a team, or you can go into the Entra Admin Center and invite them as a guest. And ta-da, they would appear as a guest over here. User 1 coming out of there, user 3 coming out of here. And therefore, you could give them access to M365 or cloud-based apps that are tied into Entra ID. If you want to automatically make that happen, okay, then you configure cross-tenant sync. Okay? And what happens is the source tenant, it pushes the user into your tenant as a guest user object. Okay? You can map attributes. What do you get today when you invite a guest to your tenant by default? What do you know about that guest object from a directory standpoint? Anyone know? What does it take to invite a guest? What do you got to know? Email, very good. What else? Email. And email. That was a bad joke. All you need to know is an email address, right? Therefore, the only thing you really know on that guest object, do you know a first name? Do you know a last name? Do you know a department? Do you know a title? You don't know any of that, right? With cross-tenant sync, the source tenant, you can push all of that lovely, rich attribute data onto the guest user in your house. Okay? Question, please?
Yeah, and this might just be my gap in knowledge, but so would that, for instance, imply that if we have folks
in our primary tenant, and then we've got kind of all of our child companies, that they would then have access to our like public sites that we have available across our intranet and other like SharePoint resources? Or would they still have to be added because they have that guest?
Great.
classification?
I love your question. So what you're saying is, when I get this little purple or green user in my tenant as a guest, okay, does that mean they have access to stuff in my tenant? By default, Mark is correct. No, they don't. Okay, that just puts them at your front door, on your doorstep is how I call it, right? If you want to open the door and let them walk into said room of your house, you have to authorize that guest user to do that. Same thing you're doing today when you manually bring a guest into your house, or you add them to a team. You just invited them as a guest, created their account, and stuck them in that room for the team. So cross-tenant sync does not magically stick people in groups in your house. It puts them into your tenant as a guest, and then you need to authorize them to access enterprise apps, Teams, SharePoint sites, Power BI, Power Apps. Oh, you got all kinds of options there. But you control the authorization.
So, but that's not something we could do at a tenant level, where we could say, okay, everyone who has @tenant.com email, they have access to.
She said that's not something I can do at the tenant level. There's good news, you can.
As long as you put it in a group, then you can assign a group.
Bingo, Mark, spot on. So, and if you have Entra ID, if you have Entra ID Plan 1, which you all need one license in the back, you need one license of Entra ID Plan 1 in your tenant, even if it's for yourself, okay? And here's why. Here's a quick little detour. If you don't have any Entra ID Plan 1 licenses in your tenant, how many days does Entra save your sign-in and audit logs for?
Not enough.
Not enough is the correct answer. More detailed answer is 7 days. That is retarded, okay? My admin tells me I can't say that word. I apologize, and I'm being recorded. I'm in trouble. So you only get 7 days of sign-in logs. If you buy one Entra ID Plan 1, or Business Premium, which is in that bundle, right? You get 30 days in the entire tenant for every user's sign-ins. Okay? Go get one of those licenses. All right. So you can create a dynamic group that says any guest user with this domain is automatically in the group, and that's granted to this place of my world, and life is good, and you don't even have to think about it. Okay? All right. Full life cycle management. So that's the creation. What about when that user in their home tenant? This home tenant over here is where they really live and they authenticate, right? And when they win the lottery and don't work there anymore, and that user gets deprovisioned, what happens to your guest account today? Nothing, right? How many of you have hundreds or thousands of guests in your tenant? You're like, do they still even work over there? Right? They automatically get cleaned up. Okay? If their department or attributes change, those sync across. And so it's a really nice story. Is cross-tenant sync designed for two companies that are collaborating generally or collaborating loosely together that don't have a deep partnership relationship? No. Okay, so don't do cross-tenant sync for just, oh yeah, every single person that I have a guest for, I should go wire up cross-tenant sync. No, 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 no. Okay? This is for if you're a multi-tenant org. Okay, and there's a deeper special business relationship that you have between these two entities. Okay? All right, service integration is the moving target, meaning what can I do as a guest user in a tenant? Teams is a really pretty good story there, right? The new Teams client, you better be using it because it's getting deprecated. The old one is getting deprecated at the end of March, if I remember right. Okay? And so the new Teams client is mostly fantastic. The tenant switching is fantastic, okay? The tenant switching is, I love it, okay? But email's a totally different story. If you're a guest in a tenant, what can I do with, does that give me the ability to have an email address in your house? Not at all. And I don't know what the eventual story of that will be, okay? There is a magic way to give them an email address in your tenant. Come talk to me if you want to know about that, okay? Only available for cloud source services and integrations. Hence, if you're in AD world and you want guests to come there, not going to help you. Okay? All right. Let's disconnect your Active Directory from Entra ID, the Exchange use case. How many of you still have some type of Exchange on-prem that you're like, I want to get rid of this thing? I think I talked to you earlier. I love it. There's hands start going up. Okay? All of you other people, what? Don't ever had Exchange. You're all native in the cloud. You're using Gmail. That was a joke. You called us a few years ago. Okay. All right. All right. I want to completely get off any reference or need for that on-prem Exchange server. Real quick. Get off your last Exchange server. 0 mail flow going on here. Okay. So that's milestone 1. Stop needing to, quote, enable that remote mailbox command and let Entra ID or Exchange Online provision mailboxes. So if you create a user at AD today, there are no Exchange attributes on it, and it syncs up, and you give a license to it, the cloud's going to say, boom, mailbox in the cloud, rock and roll. And as long as your mail points straight to the cloud, you're good to go. Okay? Identify all your Exchange-related object types and what OU and AD they're in. DLs, shared mailbox, conference rooms, ex-employees that still need mailbox retention, any Exchange objects that there's no need for an Exchange object in the end after this partial cut that I'm going to explain to you. Okay? Then you stop the sync. So Entra ID Connect sync, you're going to stop it. You're going to run this magic little command to disable sync for the entire tenant. Start waiting. How long is a different discussion, but there's a little window of time there. And then you move those Exchange objects to an OU that's not in sync scope at all. Okay? And then you install a new instance of Entra ID Connect and don't sync that OU that you moved all those things to. And you've now just completely taken Exchange off the table, and all those conference rooms, shared mailboxes, distribution lists, what do they look like when you run step disable sync for the tenant? Who knows what that does magically other than Reese? When you have all these objects that are synced up to the cloud and the cloud knows they came from on-prem, when you run that command, the entire tenant, every object that came from AD, floop, flips and says the cloud owns me. This is what makes this magic happen. Okay? Then you install the new instance of Entra ID Connect and you exclude those objects you want to keep in the cloud, and they stay natively in the cloud. But your people that still might need an AD account, and there's use cases there, those all get just resynced up and they get honed back up and you're good to go. Okay? Therefore, when you onboard a new employee, you just create the new employee. You don't need Exchange PowerShell, you don't need Exchange Control Panel, nothing. You just create the AD object, sync it up, give it a license, boom, done. The only little nuance that you still have to understand is if the user is still in AD and you want to add email addresses to them because they got married or you like to have fun and give them 20 email addresses, right? You do that in AD still in the proxy addresses attribute. Okay? And that'll sync up and the cloud honors it and you're good to go. All right. Question?
Sorry.
No.
What is the end user impact when you disable the sync? Like, is there any disruption from the end user perspective?
Excellent question. I didn't even tell you to ask that. Good job. What's the end user impact when you run this lovely little disable sync for the entire tenant? Typically, the end users have no clue that you're doing this unless they try to do a self-service password reset. Or you make a change in AD and expect that to the flow because I just turned the thing off for this window of time. So you're going to do this at a window of time where you've got some time that's not going to disrupt users. But they can still log into the cloud. I'm assuming you're doing password hash sync and the authentication happens in the cloud. They can still log into the cloud just fine. They have no idea that you're doing this. Okay? Unless they're doing a specific thing like resetting my password that has to reach back down on-prem. Okay? User and security groups are now reconnected back up, and all the Exchange objects stay in the cloud. So basically, this, I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So today, what I just described is the only supported way to take an existing object that's in AD that's synced up to the cloud and flip its source of authority to be in the cloud. Okay? Does anyone think I'm lying right now? Tomorrow, I'm getting ahead of myself. Tomorrow, wait to see what Microsoft might provide in the future. But what about that cool recycle bin trick? Does anyone know what I'm talking about here? Okay, where you move the user out of sync scope from AD and it gets deleted in the cloud. He goes in the recycle bin, you go resurrect him and he comes back to life and he's cloud mastered and you're like, screw you Microsoft, I don't have to break sync for the whole tenant, right? Microsoft doesn't like it, it could cause issues. That's about all I can say about that. Honestly, I don't recommend it. Okay? Have you got experiences doing that? And would you recommend it?
No.
Okay.
That got the good cycle getting deleted every 30 minutes.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. There's some nuances to it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, question. Holy crap, 10 minutes. All right, I got to move. You should be able to create new users in the cloud. They have full functionality before you're ready to turn off the sync. So when you're ready to kill the sync here, you be like, hey, for that new hire, I'm going to create them in the cloud. And they can do all their job just like they need to. That means your devices better be hooked to the cloud, right? Your applications are tied to the cloud. They don't need an AD object. Your file shares are moved to the cloud. I got to move really fast. Okay. Migration patterns. These are just definitions, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Okay. Then in 2021 versus now in 2024. Okay. We're going to give you some guidance around these things here. So there's a lot on each of these slides. I'm not going to have time to talk about every single one of these use cases. Pull the deck afterwards. From an application standpoint, if you have apps that use federated authentication and they're not pointing to Entra, migrate them. Web apps, migrate them. I tried to highlight in different colors on the far right-hand column that 2024, what are the state of affairs today versus back in 21 when I did this presentation. Okay. I've tried to highlight things that are like new and different. Okay. And so hopefully those stand out. If anyone has questions on any specific thing here, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving. Okay. My favorite here is, right, you're using applications using a third-party LDAP service. Let's talk about why, okay, and revisit that approach if we can. Okay, intra-private access. If you do have to have that VPN use case because you have a fat client that has to talk to something, this replaces VPN. It's a whole nother technology there. App migration. So rich client apps, private access. Internet resilient mission critical apps, still wait on that. Meaning if I've got an app that people die if they can't sign into it, and therefore if my internet pipe is not available and I can't go out to the cloud to authenticate, well, let's talk about how that app should authenticate then. Okay? Question?
Yeah, your next one, LDAP interface to AD. So do you need the third party?
Not necessarily. Okay, so if you've got an app that has to talk LDAP to the directory, and does Entra ID natively do LDAP? It does not. So how the crap can I get LDAP functionality straight from Entra ID? You spin up Entra ID domain services, and it spins up a little Active Directory forest that's coming from the user objects in Entra that gets pushed automatically into this little forest, and you can point your apps to that forest. Okay? That does not, it's a cloud, it's a managed instance of Active Directory. You don't have to patch the domain controllers, okay? It's a little 2-server Active Directory forest that gets the identities and groups from Entra, so the objects can be Entra mastered and they get magically synced into this little forest, and that gives you LDAP. Same username, same password, same group memberships. It's not designed to domain join your PCs to it. Bad idea. Okay? But if you've got an app that needs LDAP, like had clients that have a firewall and they need to do authentication on the firewall to the directory and it needs LDAP, no problem. I'll point to that cloud instance of AD. Okay? Any other things here? DNS, DHCP, get it off Active Directory. Right? If AD's doing your DNS and DHCP, those are some of the final things you'll get off of. You can move that to your networking infrastructure. Okay? Printing. Cloud print is a pretty cool solution, and I don't need my old print servers for that anymore. Okay. Let's jump over to users. A bunch of evaluates here where it used to be wait. Groups, I've already talked about groups and why I think you should move those to Cloud Master. If you do need them in AD, you can sync those back. Collaboration, migrate those to the cloud. If you have to have group write back, you can do that. Recertification of membership. This is called attestation, like who's in the group and do you still need to be in the group, and every 6 months I'm going to make the owner tell me yes or no. Hello, move all that to the cloud. Okay, that's called access reviews. All right, devices. Existing workstations, migrate them, right? You're either going to use life cycling, meaning it's time to replace this hardware because it's old, and intra-join all new devices, or if it has issues and you have to go touch it and you're going to reload it, hello, hook it to the cloud and reload it to the cloud, or do an in-place migration. I'm not a big fan of those, but there is a new Windows profile that has to happen to get to that migration. Any questions on this? Lapse, Windows Lapse, Entra ID, good stuff. If you want local admin access to your desktops and you want to securely store that credential, that's all natively integrated to Entra ID now. It's awesome. So you go to Entra ID, you go to the device, you say, give me the lapse password, it retrieves it, gives it to you on the screen, you copy it, you can log in as the local administrator, that password gets recycled automatically and it's one-time use and you're done. Okay, this is the happy smiley face version of lapse, not the old AD integrated lapse hell. Okay, so that's good stuff. Mac OS, you can now, I got your attention, Aaron. You can now natively authenticate to Mac OS using your Entra ID. Okay, that's came out a few months ago. A guy on my team has played with it, got it set up. He knows more about it than I do. Okay, but that's something that's definitely new today than wasn't back in the 21. All right. Data migration. Basically, this one here, get your file shares moved to the cloud. Application file shares, depending on the app. Databases, evaluate, migrate data with the source of access to that data. Governance and compliance implications. And there are some interesting use cases if you want to go to Azure Files and your devices are interjoined and you want Windows authentication to Azure Files. You can do Kerberos natively to Entra ID on Azure Files. So you can get an integrated Windows authentication over an SMB file shared. If you followed that whole thing, good job. Whew. Okay. Call to action. I want to touch base on this real quick. We've mentioned JourneyTEAM does this, what we call a foundational identity assessment. We take a quick look in your environment and help you understand what you're doing from an identity management posture. We charge $3,000 for it. As a promo, as today or tomorrow, if you sign up from the QR code, we're going to throw in 2 free FIDO keys. Who doesn't have a FIDO key in the room? Oh my gosh. See these are all shrink wrapped. Mark's got 2 of them here that he procured through JourneyTEAM, right? These are YubiKey NFC, so they work on your phone as an NFC device, or you can plug them in USB-C. Okay, we're giving these away if you sign up for a foundational identity assessment. These are worth like $400 a piece, so it's an amazing savings. I'm just kidding. All right. No, they're not $400. They're not too bad. But anyway, so be aware of that. And I will shut up now and turn the time back over to Carter, who will close us out.
Now let's hear it for Eric for this presentation. Thank you, everyone.